Hello, hello. Welcome to the Illinois Green Party series. We're happy to have everyone on tonight. Let's see, David is otherwise busy right now. He couldn't attend, so it's just me at the reins. And we have on again a favorite guest of the show, our most frequented guest. We have Peter Schwartzman, Mayor of Galesburg. So, Peter, thank you so much for coming on. How have you been?
Oh, I've been great. How you been? Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I've been doing good. I might be a little tired today. We got on a train. We woke up at 5:30 Eastern time, so I'm a little tired, but we're doing okay. We're gonna get through this hour. I can feel it.
Sweet. Yeah, I know. I'm probably the same way. So we'll just pass the baton back and forth.
That's what we'll do. That's what we'll do. So I'm gonna leave it up to you. We're gonna expand on the last episode where we had you on, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about the local politics. So, which avenue would you like to go down first?
Let's do local, and then some of that may even dovetail with the climate change and such.
Yeah, let's do it. All right. So tell us about the mayorship. Tell us about how long have you been in the spot officially?
Yeah, I think it was May 3rd or May 6th I started, so it's almost 7 months now. And I just to remind folks that the mayorship in Galesburg it's called a kind of a weak mayor position. So I still maintain my full-time job as a professor.
Okay.
And so that limits some of the time that I can spend working on city politics. I mean, I do what I can. I love this position. I love the potential that it has to serve not only Galesburg but maybe provide a model for other communities. And so I really see that as a tremendous opportunity, and I'm looking forward, every day to learning new things that are opportunities, things that are going well elsewhere, and trying to inject those new ideas into our culture here.
Excellent. Yeah. So give us a bit of the slice of life. What are some things that happen in that position, special events, and what do you do most days?
Yeah, so day to day, I was a city councilor for 10 years, and while I was a city councilor, we have 7 of them, and you get your run of the mill emails or phone calls. There's a hole in the sidewalk, or there's a dog loose, or my neighbor is selling drugs, or things like that. That's a typical day.
Okay.
But I think as mayor now, people look to me to be kind of a guiding light for the community in some regard. And I get like bigger picture questions, like, what's the safety of our community going to look like? What are we doing to ensure that youth have activities to do? And I can talk at length about that. What kinds of plants are we growing? How are we beautifying the community? How are we creating food for people who may not have access? We have some food insecurity, obviously, as most places do. So those are the kind of bigger questions I get asked, and I have answers. I mean, I'm not sure they're the right ones, but I'm always willing to engage in conversation along these lines. These are really important questions, and I think all communities should be working on them. And frankly, I mean, that's what we're doing right now. You and I, right now, today, we're doing that work. I think, imagine if other communities did this on a regular basis. I'm a firm believer that all the challenges we have, that all of us human beings face right now at this moment, could be remedied through concerted, deliberative action by us, the people. And that's why I'll come back anytime you invite me. I love it. And it, a lot of times activating my own voice in these matters, which sometimes is difficult. I mean, it gets complicated. You twirl your tongue, you mince words and things, but it helps us see clarity. And that's really what it's about, right? Coming to some kind of unified clarity that we can work together on.
Yeah. So I've done some I guess you call it volunteer work for local mutual aid groups. You mentioned food insecurity. These mutual aid groups, they acquire a lease through a refrigerator site somewhere in a distribution center, and I've gone there and packed food. I think they rescue food before it gets thrown away. Maybe it's close to being past date and it's going to be tossed out, but they rescue it. They put it in a fridge warehouse. We pack it, going through it, making sure nothing's rotten, and then we distribute that plus dry food and other needed items. And then I've gone to volunteer for distribution of those. Do you guys have something similar in Galesburg? Any mutual aid activity?
Yeah, it's been growing. In fact, a lot of it came about right as COVID was kind of taking root. We had people build these blessing boxes and put them on various parts of the community. These are just basically 2x4s that then have boxes where people can put food or non-perishables, or even things like coats and maybe hygiene items and such. And those just popped up like all over the place. So
Nice.
and they were getting used, no doubt. And I imagine they're starting to pick up again, as today was below freezing for one of the first days of the year for most of the day. And so, that's when people need these things. I mean, we are working on a big project. I was talking about food hubs here with some groups about 10 years ago. And in fact, I helped found with my friend John Hunnigan, who actually I'm in his apartment at the moment. But it turns out, he and I started a program called KPCK, stands for Knox Prairie Community Kitchen. And in that group, we saw a need for people to get together and have meals. And that group over the last 10, 12 years has done that. We have 2 meals a month. At this point, we're not serving those meals in person because of COVID restrictions. But when we did for years and years and years, it was a really important community event, and it brought people from all over the city. There were no sieves. You just had to be able to walk in and get your food and sit and enjoy a meal and a conversation with someone you might not even know. And it was a great opportunity. But no, there's lots of things like that. And I think the way I look at it is it's called the care economy. There's so much emphasis on our economic, metrics like economic growth and mean income and things like this, and poverty rates. And those are important statistics. But what about the care economy? What are we doing to measure that? And I think the care economy, frankly, especially COVID has clarified, is perhaps the more important economy in the end. I mean, if you think about how would you survive today without money? Like just today, this day. And you could survive because someone who had something you needed could provide it to you, right? Now, that might be a couch. That might be a meal. That might just be a conversation. That might be a coat, those kinds of things, right? And so, if you didn't have someone to do that for you, the only way we can get that in our society is like go to a store and buy it. Well, that requires money. But without money, we have care. And we're going to have care, and we need to kind of maximize our care because we have a lot of people struggling right now. It's not just, getting heat and food and water. Those are essentials. But also what we sometimes don't even think of essentials. And I think comfort, love, nourishment, social nourishment, connection, and a care economy can really pick people up. We have a lot of people, we know there's a lot of use of illicit drugs at this time, right? And or even illicit drugs, right? And such as alcohol and marijuana. And we have addiction that is set in. Now, how do you deal with addiction? You do it through the care economy. That's how you do it. And so to me, what you just talked about and the work that you're doing is so important, is because if everyone contributed to the care economy, which you all have the capacity to do too, that's the also thing. You rich or poor, you still have that care economy that you can contribute to, and we all can do it on in as much as we're capable. Right? We have capacity. Some people have more capacity. I'd also point out even young people can contribute in the care economy. They may not be legally able to contribute in the so-called economic economy, the money economy, but they can also care, and they can care for their grandparents, they can care for their younger siblings, they can care for their neighbor. There's lots of things that they can do, and I think a lot of times we think we need money to do things, and I would argue that care economy suggests otherwise. That we have neglected to recognize the human capacity in this one area, and I'm emphasizing it and going on a little bit because I think it's completely lost on the discourse related to economic growth and such.
Yeah. So I love what you're saying there, and I am really resonating with it. I have this thought of you as a human being can bring value to other people, and it doesn't have to be in exchange for money. You are just so cool and so awesome of a person already that you can improve and bring value to people's lives. Like right there, mutual aid, just helping people out in your community, your family, friends, people people you don't know, but share space with. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's a great way to put it. Care economy. Yeah. Oh, wow. So thinking about the mayorship, it looks like, and it sounds like this is really an avenue where you can push policy and you can push ideas and inspire. It may be, as you put it, like the weaker version of a mayorship, versus like being the pinnacle in other structures. But you still have a voice. I imagine you talk with the press quite a bit. Is that true?
Well, that's a good question. You threw me off in the last part of it.
Sorry.
Our press is challenged. First of all, our major radio station is owned by the former mayor, so of course they're not going to give me much time to say anything, good or bad. And frankly, I don't think they haven't reached out to me since the election, and it's been almost 7 months now. And that's really the only main radio station we have in our city. So that shows that there was more than politics involved in what was going down in this election. Now we also have a local paper, but as is true with a lot of small local papers in towns like Galesburg, they're suffering. They staffing is very difficult. Most of their articles are coming from outside because they just don't have the time or the money to support local journalism. And so, no, I don't get as much contact with the press as I would enjoy. I mean, I think it's a conduit to the people, and I have a lot of ambition for our community, and I have a lot of positive feelings about it, and unfortunately, a lot of the press is more negatively oriented. So, I think it would be a good kind of antidote to what you often see. But the first part of your question, has to do with just setting a vision. So this election was contested, no doubt, and ideologically, myself and the former mayor are quite different. I mean, I'm a full-time professor working in environmental studies, and he's a full-time owner of a radio station that runs essentially, Rush Limbaugh type media most of the day. So you can see there's ideological shift. And so I came in, and I think there was a fear that somehow, I was going to come in with sledges and sledgehammers and such, and just knock things down, and like I may have done when I played basketball back in when I was younger. But no, that's not my philosophy. Actually, I really do believe, and very much counter to what the mainstream media is depicting right now. We have so much more in common with each other, independent of some specific issues that we often get split on. We have so much in common. Simply put, in Galesburg, almost all the children go to the same school. We all drink the same water. We drive up and down the same streets. We go to the same restaurants. We go to the same theaters. We go to the same library. We rely on the same police and fire personnel. We're paying taxes to the same entities, right? So we have so much in common, and we have so much to gain from each other in terms of understanding each other. We're not all on the same socioeconomic situation, but if we open our arms and eyes to and minds and hearts to the things that other people are feeling and experiencing. It's we know that a lot of people in poverty are suffering worse now than they may have been before COVID for obvious reasons. But as it turns out, and I mean, people in upper echelon incomes too, many of them, especially those in our local community, are also suffering. They're trying to find employees for their work. They're trying to deal with health impacts that affected their workers or themselves or their families. So it's a very trying time for everyone. And I think if we saw each other as humans first and reached out and in that recognized the diversity that we have, there's a beauty in that. Just like in a forest, a rainforest is a beautiful thing because of the diversity, the colors, the sounds, the heights, the moisture levels. All of that is fascinating within a ecosystem. Well, the same is true in a human society. The fact that we can go, and I'll give you an example. If you look at the Knox College men's soccer team and the Carl Sandburg, which is a community college men's soccer team, both of those teams are incredibly diverse. They have students from all over the world. I mean, I think combined, those two teams probably have 30 countries represented, and they all moved to Galesburg to play soccer. And so that, to me, that's a microcosm of the way the world needs to think about things. Work as a team, independent of where you're from. But from those places you come from, you draw strength, you draw wisdom, you draw ambition, you draw insight. And if we could recognize that and kind of work in that capacity, I think we'd be much better off as a humanity, right?
For sure. Yeah. And another thing that we all commonly rely on is the sewer system. And as soon as the sewer system's broken and busted in a town or in a city, it's a problem for everyone. So very true.
Well,
very true.
Well, that's a good example. I mean, that's a really good example. I think we don't, but okay. So the other part is, so I came in to try to develop teamwork. I wanted us to work as a team. So we had a council before I was elected that was probably 4 against me, maybe 1 in favor of me. I'm excluding myself. I think I'm supporting of myself, but and then there was a 1 who may have been on the fence. Well, we've shifted that a lot, and that the voters kind of sent a message. So we have more open-minded members of the council. We have 4 new members, and we have the 2 others. They've only been in office for a little over 2 years, and then we have the last one who's kind of the veteran. And so we have an interesting, diverse group of people, age and gender, even race. We have 2 African-American people on our council for the first time, I believe, in our history. And so that's a strength, right? That diversity of age and gender and race is a strength. So let's draw on that. And so I've been very cautious to not just come out and said, okay, this is what I ran on, this is what I was elected for, and this is what we're going to do. So what I've done the first 7 months is actually create an opportunity for us to gather in what's called the strategic planning process. And that process will commence in December 3rd and 4th. We're actually meeting as a council for 2 full days, 8-hour days. And we're going to sit and talk about the goals that we're going to put in place to crystallize and then work on those over the next 3 to 5 years. And so to me, when that document is finalized, I can take that document to everyone in Galesburg and said, this is what your elected representatives believe based on all the information we've received over time, because we have lots of other documents we're looking at, a lot of homework to do. These are the principles, these are the goals of our community. And as your mayor, I'm going to work towards these goals every day, right? And so that makes it less about me and more about the community. And it's never been about me, frankly. And people know me well enough know that that's true. But in our current world, the politicians being very egotistical and very self absorbed and even narcissistic in many instances, I think it's hard for people to relate to that. And so I'm trying to actually not just change the direction Galesburg goes, but I'm also trying to change kind of the expectations of people in terms of what they look for in their local representatives.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I asked the last city council member that we had on the show this similar question, but maybe it's different in Galesburg. Is there an option for the city council to pitch it to the public for a public ballot? Say if there's something they're not sure on passing or saying yay or nay on, giving it to the people. Is that a process that exists?
Well, it does.
Hmm.
Well, let me say this. I mean, there are, it should exist. There are communities in Illinois that it does exist.
Okay.
There is some legislation that we are going to introduce, or I'm going to try to introduce next year. Um, there's so many things. I'm juggling too many things at once, but you're
Yeah, I
absolutely right.
bet.
I think you're just talking about enhancing democracy. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And we should do that. Now, it is required in many instances to do that. So, for instance, if we wanted
Okay.
to start a park district in our area, we have to take it to a referendum.
Okay.
A few years ago, we aggregated our electricity power for the city's members, and they had to vote to allow the city council to negotiate on their behalf for the rates. And that vote was very close, but they did give the city council that right. And what that allowed us to do for the last 7 or so years is provide 100% renewable electricity to the citizens of Galesburg at a reduced cost, at a significant cost savings. And so there's an example. Now, that was mandated. We didn't have the right to do that by law without a referendum. But there are a lot of other things that could come before a referendum. And, we know, looking historically, at least in some recent examples, a lot of bottle bills have come in front of the public for a vote. Like, do you take cash for a bottle or not? And I know,
Yes.
for instance, in the District of Columbia, where my father lives, he worked very tirelessly to do that, and it was not successful. And why wasn't it successful? Because there was a huge pushback and a lot of money spent by the bottling industry to get that bill to fail. We
Really?
see, yes, and that's not just in DC. You'd think what would promote them to do that? I mean, it's a whole nother topic for discussion, but yeah, there's a lot of money to be made in providing new bottles, and communities that have pushed for bottle bills have often faced a lot of opposition from the bottling industry. You similarly see municipal cable and internet. That's another thing that's been brought in front of people, and time again, it usually fails on sometimes a closed vote. But because who has access to the media and the advertising related to the bills themselves. Typically, the entity that's going to lose money on that is going to spend tremendous amounts and in some ways misrepresent some of the facts or only tell their side of the story. So it's a referendum. I guess my point is, while a referendum is fundamentally about as democratic as you can get, it isn't without its risks, and it isn't without some challenges, given the way they often are presented. I mentioned the aggregation of power in Galesburg. I mean, even though the council and the mayor at the time supported it unanimously, the way it was worded was very technical. The voters didn't get a lot of information about it. And when you read that the city council has the right to do blank and blank, people said no. And the vote was something like 52 to 48 in favor.
Wow.
And frankly, looking back on that, to me, that was one of the most powerful things that the citizens could have done, not only to save money, but to move our community and the world towards renewable energy. And so you can see where a referendum sounds like a positive thing, but if it's going to be implemented more broadly, we need to be very clear about how it's done, right? How the access to media is available. We need media like this one that isn't being paid for exclusively by multinational corporations. Otherwise, you're going to get a lot of misinformation, and so that's just something to keep in mind. But I agree with you. We do need to allow citizens to do that. One of the things you're talking about, just to be clear to the audience, there's initiatives where a group of citizens can put something on the ballot. And it could be the purchase of a school, it could be growing food in one's yard, that kind of thing. But it's the citizens that voted in, and they don't have to wait on a council to pass it. And because it's in response to the fact that a lot of times councils they show a lot of inertia as it relates to doing positive things. And so this allows the community to kind of take the ball and run with it the way they want to.
Yeah. Thank you for telling our audience about that. I think it's a powerful thing. And it makes it so that you in your position can remain somebody who is, working in compromise, because you always have to work in compromise when you're part of a council and part of a democratic body like that. But the people always have that option, as long as that's part of the structure of the bylaws and the Constitution there, for whatever level of government we're talking about. The people always have the option to push a proposal that they want on the ballot, and they can demand it whether the city council was bringing it up for a vote or not. They can say, nope, it's a vote that's happening and the people will decide. And I think it's pretty powerful and it's pretty great. I wish Illinois as a state had it in a more fundamental way. It's tricky in Illinois. I understand it that people can get enough signatures for a ballot proposal to be put on, but it can be bumped by the Senate body. Or wait, does Illinois have a General Assembly? No, we have a General Assembly. Okay. It can be pushed out of contention. We can only have 3 proposals on the ballot per election cycle. So if the General Assembly puts 3 things on there, the public's one gets bumped. So it's like we have it and it's like we don't. It makes it very unlikely for anything that doesn't have a ton of appeal to the current legislatures. It makes it unlikely for that to be a route that would be successful. Otherwise, it'd be great if we were like Michigan. Michigan is my home state, and they have public ballot proposals, and the people are passing stuff like independent redistricting and legal marijuana, and it's pretty fantastic. So I wish we had that here. It's just something we can't utilize.
Yeah, I know there's efforts in different communities, and people should. I mean, I have some literature. If somebody wants to contact me, I can provide them some background on that. I plan to bring that to the table next year, so it's not on this year's agenda for me. But looking down the road, it's certainly something that can be done, and it doesn't take a huge amount of effort. Frankly, it's just determination to get it done, and I think most councils would support it. I mean, you're basically saying, should the people have the right to govern themselves in some ways? And I would think the answer would be yes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's not easy in Michigan. The first time that they tried to get legalized cannabis on the ballot, they couldn't get quite enough signatures that met the quota. So it's a pretty hard bar to reach still. So it's not like there's hundreds of ballot proposals that you have to read. There's a threshold that you have to meet, and it finally got on there the next election cycle. So I think it's a great thing. Let's see.
Yeah, I just want one small clarification, because I think we're both saying we're both on the same page, but I think as a listener we might be confused. So there's one thing to create the opportunity at the local level to do this. I think that bar there is not that high. You just have to convince 4 councilors out of 7 to do it. Now, to put something actually on the ballot, now that might take a higher burden, because of course you would want that to be the case. You wouldn't want to just put any willy-nilly thing up for vote, and then all kinds of craziness can actually prevail, right? So so that's just a subtle distinction, but I think I think you and I are on the same page. I want to make sure the audience is.
Yes, I think you're great clarification. Thank you so much. Yeah, we're looking at about the half hour here. Maybe we start transitioning. I think we already were talking some climate change in there. Let's transition to talking more about climate change. I was doing some research on the CEJA bill that had passed, Clean Energy Jobs Act, right? And looks like they put back in the incentive program for getting solar installed. for citizens to get solar installed on their roofs or property. So that's pretty great. Anything standing out about CEJA for you and for Galesburg?
Well, the thing that people missed out on, and I read some of the kind of the mainstream takes on the bill.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that they failed to talk about, I mean, both pro and con. On the pro side, the emphasis on what I call equity, or what they call equity, right? So we could have, you can imagine who owns the power companies today, right? It's large industrialites who, most of whom don't live in Illinois or live in Galesburg. But yet we buy their power. We give them money. We give them lots of our money. I mean, think about your heating bill this month or next month, and where is that going? Well, it's generally not going to stay locally. It's going to go somewhere else. And you just multiply your bill by the 30,000 people in Galesburg, and you can see we're talking millions of dollars per month that's leaving the community, right? So in that situation, then who is getting that money? We talk about poverty in our community. Well, part of the reason why we have poverty in our community is because we're just sending all our money out of the community. Okay, so those who live here, particularly those historically who have been disadvantaged by race, by gender, by age, they have not been able to really benefit from the industrialization. Now, and we've had a lot of deindustrialization in Galesburg. A lot of our jobs have moved to Mexico or China, or basically a race to the bottom, as some refer to, the labor pool. So how are we going to employ people who were previously employed in industrial zone, industrial work? Well, what's the new industry? Well, energy is a new industry. When you build solar arrays, when you put up wind turbines, when you potentially even manufacture these things locally or regionally, that's going to create a lot of jobs. We know that. There's a lot more jobs in renewable energy than there are in your traditional fossil fuels, and it's not even close. It's not even close. So now, who gets those jobs? Well, and this is one of the tensions in CEJA, right? The unions were very strong in CEJA, and they wanted all of the jobs. Well, it turns out unions historically have not been very diverse on racial grounds, or even in many cases on gender grounds. And so if all the jobs go to the unions, and I'm pro-union, but if you give all the jobs to the union, then there's going to be no growth of these jobs or opportunities for people of color or women. And so the bill was very explicit about this. And in fact, this is why it was held up a fair bit, because the unions have a really strong connection to the governor. And the governor really pushed this bill forward, but he had to insist that people of color in particular needed to have access to these jobs. And you have to do that by setting up training centers in the communities of color where people can get trained to work on solar, wind, and some other renewables. That has to be explicit. If you don't make it explicit, if you don't create those schools, those training centers, then guess what? You're still going to have tremendous poverty in most of our inner cities, be they small cities or large cities. And that has to change. You cannot grow a city like ours, and only advantage half the people. And we've known this. We know this. And our care economy, what I was talking about earlier, is very important, but it is also not the panacea, and it doesn't replace the money economy, right? It can do a lot, but it doesn't make up for the money economy. And so in the money economy, we have energy, we have food, we have other resources we need. So we need to create jobs in those areas for people of color, for in areas of the state that are impoverished and have been neglected. So that was a really powerful piece of CEJA that is lost. Most people can't describe it the way. But there was a group called Illinois People's Action that fought really hard to ensure that equity was there, and I commend them, and I commend the governor, frankly, in this way for insisting that. Now, on the bad side of CEJA was, why did it take so long for CEJA to pass? And that's because they had to make conciliatory offerings in terms of millions and millions of dollars to the coal and the nuclear power plants and power industry in our community, in our state.
Yep.
Illinois, people should know, is the state that produces the most nuclear power of any state in the country. And it also is, it would be number 5 in the world. If Illinois was a country, we would produce the 5th most nuclear power of all of the countries. France, of course, is ahead of us. Some other countries are ahead of us, but we would be number 5. So that just gives you an idea of how big that industry is and how much money they make every day, and why their aging plants are going to need a lot of subsidies in order to be maintained. And so that came on the backs of the taxpayers of Illinois. And, unfortunately, it was a compromise that some people felt they had to make given the power structures that exist in our state. And that's quite unfortunate, but it is the reality of it. And back to this democracy point that was brought up earlier, how much of this was even understood at any level by everyday people in the state of Illinois? And I'd argue almost none. I feel like I was one of maybe the only 3 people in my city of 30,000 who were any way informed about this bill or what it meant or what its implications were. So how can state Congress function when these bills, these huge bills that will have long-term implications in terms of poverty, in terms of joblessness, in terms of hunger, in terms of race relations, racial economic equity, all these things, and yet almost no one in the state knows anything about it but a few people. That's not a democracy, right? And so back to the point, just to reaffirm the theme being, if we want democracy in our communities, we have to kind of demand it at all levels. And if you're going to pass a bill that is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, that should be something that is contemplated in the communities around the state in a public way. Input is taken before a vote is taken. And so I would advocate for that. So this bill probably, if the voters ultimately had their say, I think the compromise would be much less favorable to some of these large industries that are basically waiting for us to bail them out as their industries move. They become aged. They become antiquated, frankly. Yes.
There are some nice things in regards to that, of these antiquated systems and industries. So CEJA requires the closure of all private coal-fired power plants by 2030. We wish it would be sooner, but I guess, that was the compromise that they came up with. And then all private gas-fired power plants by 2045. That seems far too far in the future. Gas is one of those ones that releases methane in its transportation even before it's burned. I forget what it's called. Is it incidental greenhouse gas emissions? But when you release methane is like 4 times more potent than just CO2 in terms of greenhouse gas effect.
Well, it's actually about 28 times.
20. Oh gosh, I was way off. That's horrendous.
It's 28 times. And this 2045 date, I mean, that's 25, almost 25 years from now.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. I mean that for us to be talking about what we're going to be doing in 25 years is ridiculous. Related to this, right? I mean, we know that fossil fuels have to come down. We know our use of them, our dependence on them, not just in the United States, but globally, right? If China and India continue to grow at the rate they're growing economically, it won't matter what the United States does if we're all using fossil fuels. I mean, the United States could just disappear from the face of the earth, and the CO2 that's going to be, or the methane emitted from China and India is going to far outpace the United States. In fact, right now, China's emissions is larger than the U.S.'s contribution, which is kind of a shocking thing to realize. Now, they have 4 times the population, and many of our businesses are there located. So who gets credit for that? That's another debate. But the point being, we have to reduce our fossil fuel use. We just have to. And the beauty of it, and the thing that people should be happy about, is that there are alternatives today, right now, not 2045. In fact, these things have been around for 10, 20, in some cases, 100 years, right? We had solar-powered water heaters in the late 1800s in Florida, and that's what people used to take hot showers with before, the use of all these other more, updated, fast, complicated, state-of-the-art kind of stuff. And so the solutions exist. We just have to move more quickly. And so 2045 to me is a joke. It's a joke. The fact that we're gonna allow natural gas plants to continue to thrive in Illinois for the next 25 years, I'm outraged by it. Now, admittedly, we don't have one in Galesburg, and so for us to talk about this issue seems a bit far afield for what I talk about on a daily basis with my community members.
Right.
But now I'm a hypocrite too, right? Because I'm going to go home in a little while and I'm going to have my heat on, and guess where that heat's coming from? From natural gas furnace, right? And that's true of most people in Illinois. So the thought that we're all going to go out and buy a geothermal system for our house or electric heat pump or something like this.
Right.
I mean, it's not realistic. It has to be guided by policy at a much higher level. It has to be incentivized at a much higher level. And this bill seems to make compromises, but really, in many instances, I think it's just a facade of a compromise in many instances.
Yeah, and a lot really went to these coal companies and to these other large companies. Yeah, it's really frustrating. So I brought up the stuff I knew about gas because I actually just watched a video that came out recently. It was by Climate Town. So this is a master's level graduate student who's graduated and is making videos about climate change and talked a lot about gas stoves. And I wanted to tie that back. I'll share that video in the link for people who are watching.
Good.
I want to tie that back to policy, maybe at the local level. You let me know if this is kind of outside the scope or not. But it's any new buildings will be constructed without gas lines being brought to them. Because we have induction electric heaters or grills now, which can heat your food actually faster than an open flame. You can use your cast irons or your metal pots and pans still. And this is already taking place in some areas of California. And I need to watch the video again, but it's already the law where if you put in a new building, they will not run a gas line into it, and you're going to use an electric hookup to heat up your food. And this is happening in other countries, of course, already, because gas is just not as clean as its commercials make it out to be. In this video, he plays a bunch of the old gas commercials, and there's people rapping these awful lyrics about how it's clean and everyone prefers it, and you're more manly when you cook with a gas grill, and it's really not that great. It releases particulates. It's an open flame in your apartment, and then on the way there are gas leaks, and so it's already a greenhouse emitter even before you've turned on your stove. So I highly suggest people watch that. And then I wanted to bounce it off of you, Peter. What do you think of that type of ordinance? Would it be too much at the local level? Does it need to go a step higher?
Yeah, I think it's hard for a community to mandate that type of thing. I think it might even be challenged as a block of commerce. And so it probably is something that has to be negotiated at a higher level. Okay. I mean, I think, at least in my community, I don't think that we'd really be at stage one of explaining why our gas ranges and our gas furnaces need to be replaced or need to be de-incentivized, because it's just it's so commonplace. And like you said, there's been a lot of rhetoric over the last 10 years or more, 20 years to shift. I mean, natural gas was seen as kind of the green fossil fuel. Well, it's not. There's nothing. There's no truth in that at all.
Yeah.
Actually, it's worse. And my father and I have documented this in some of our research. It's worse than gasoline as a fuel. In fact, it's on par with coal as being a contaminant of the atmosphere because, as you know, there's a lot of leakage and methane, which is the primary component of natural gas, is much more effective at absorbing the infrared radiation from the Earth than is CO2, which comes out of burning coal. So it's on par with coal. In some cases, it may even be worse than coal. And yet we're closing these coal plants because we recognize that, right? We're de-incentivizing the coal plants by 2030, but we're not disincentivizing the natural gas plants for another 15 plus years. And so your point is well taken. I think we have to show people that there are alternatives, and here's a statistic that people are. I'm about to teach an energy course next term, and so this is like a primer on that.
Yeah,
so when you
teaser.
if you think of a banana, right, being all the energy you use, right, and you could break that down, right. So you could ask, so how much of that is to turn on your television or charge your computer or your phone? Well, the answer is almost none. Probably the nub of the banana, the base. Now you add, well, how much to drive your car? Well, that's probably a third of the banana.
Okay.
How much to heat your house or air condition your house? That could be probably another half of the banana. Okay. And maybe the last third of the banana is to your hot water heater, and your refrigerator, which are going to require either natural gas or electricity. So you could see that if we focus on small things like our computers and our phones and such, that has no impact. It's the bigger pieces. Now, what I didn't explicitly say, but you remember the two biggest pieces are your car, right, and the heat. Heat and the air conditioning system. Well, the heat, particularly, and the car are running on fossil fuels directly. And depending on what kind of air conditioning system, it might be electricity, but in Illinois, most electricity is coming from coal or nuclear power, right? So almost all the energy you use is fossil fuel. It's at this, even in our contemporary world, it's about 90%. Of that 90%, most of it is still directly fossil fuels. So we're talking about burning of gasoline for cars and the burning of natural gas to heat our homes. Now, we have cars that could run on electricity. We have furnaces that can run electricity. People don't buy those because they're more expensive, right? Now, I'm not advocating that we should all be driving electric cars. In fact, I think that's a false solution. I'm not a big advocate for that. We need more electrically powered public transportation. That's the answer ultimately. A lot of people don't want to hear that answer because it's not what they get all warm and fuzzy about. But frankly, people in Europe love their public transportation, so it can be done, right? And it can be had. And in fact, Galesburg, I may have mentioned this before, had electric trolleys back in the 1920s in our community. Okay, beautiful, and people loved them, and people of all classes could afford them. You think about buying a car, paying the insurance, paying the gas, paying for maintenance. It's a very expensive thing. So public transportation is the answer, and we can run all public transportation on electric modes, and that would eliminate fossil fuels because we know we can get electricity from solar and wind. Now, can we get, can we heat our homes with electricity? Well, that's going to take a change out of our current furnaces, right? They have to become heat pumps, electric-driven heat pumps that can be powered with solar energy. Just as an aside, I have to mention it. There's a town somewhere in Illinois that in the next year or two, and this is true of a lot of towns, they're going to be having $70 million investments of solar arrays. These solar arrays are the size of about 400 football fields. They're going to become the norm in central Illinois in the next couple of years.
Okay.
And each one of those 400 football fields can power a city of about 30,000 people.
Wow.
So the point I'm making by telling you that is we are right at the cusp of making some very significant investments, partly because of CEJA. And when people realize that solar power is stable, is reliable, is dependable, is sufficient, is without air pollution, without other things, then I think people will be more inclined to support public transportation that is run on that energy.
Yeah. I love the idea of more public transit. That's what I usually take if I'm not biking. I live in, the big city, Chicago. So it's friendly here for biking purposes and for public transit. And I'd love to see more of it expand. I think every town should have its own, not rail car. What are they called again?
Trolley car?
Yes. Every town should have its own trolley car. One, because they're just neat, but two, because they're so useful.
Well, I'll tell you something about the Chicago public transit system, which I've enjoyed in my time visiting and such. Mm-hmm. Believe it or not, the city of Chicago invests about as little money as possible in that. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an untold story. They, for the little they invest, you can see the product, right? So imagine a more intensive, a more aggressive investment. You would literally transform not only Chicago, but virtually the entire state. Years ago, we had trains that went from Peoria to Galesburg and from Galesburg to Springfield and such, the state capital. Those trains no longer exist. You have to go to Chicago first and then to Springfield. And that could take almost half a day to do when it's only a 2-hour drive. So we have to create connection points for transportation, not just public intercity transportation, as well as what we traditionally think of as the subway systems for individual cities.
Absolutely. And you mentioned there's so many things I want to go back to and talk about, but you mentioned the bottle actions, returnables, where the individuals, the consumers, pay a deposit, and that deposit is essentially returned 10 cents for every can or 5 cents. It depends what state or what area we're talking about. And I've come across an idea recently where it flips that script, where it puts the onus on the company that keeps releasing these single-use plastics and encourages them to, or incentivizes them to, rather than selling you individual bottles, you as a consumer can buy really nice metal bottles, maybe glass bottles, and you can go to certain sites and just get them refilled. I mean, you're kind of already doing that when you go to Taco Bell because they hand you a cup and you go fill it. So just take that model and make it your store, and then go to your store and fill up your containers. We know how to measure liquids. Once your bottle is full, you measure it before, you measure it after. We know how much liquid you got. So why aren't we doing stuff like that? And do you think there's any policies that are like that, where we push against the single-use plastics and the companies are incentivized to look elsewhere besides their marketing and their packaging?
Right. Bottles is one example. I mean, if you think about old milk bottles, I mean, probably predates you and me, but I remember my grandmother, when I visited her when I was young, they had this aluminum canister outside the front door, and that's where the milk would be delivered in glass bottles. And then when they were done, they put the empty bottles and then get a new bottle. So it's very, and so notice that works well, especially if it's a local dairy or local production. And so we want to create economies on a local scale that help drive this as well, because a lot of money is wasted in transportation and energy cost and time, and a lot of the bottlenecks we have right now that we see are driven because we're waiting for parts that are made in all across the sea. But you can take what you're saying and expand it, not just in bottles. You could talk about rugs. Do you want a rug? Do you want to own a rug, or you just want to walk on a soft surface? And so, there's a company that Ray Anderson, before his passing, he really converted one of the more resource demanding carpet companies into one that was actually zero carbon. And as a fascinating story, I encourage people to look into. But he started like renting rugs, not selling rugs. And so the rugs would be replaced whenever people wanted them to be replaced, and the rug that's the material could be reused by the company that made the first rug. And so it really incentivized a whole bunch of different processes, and everybody was happy for it. And you didn't have to fill up landfills with rugs that nobody had use for. So that, and books can be made with one material. There's a great book called Cradle to Cradle. I encourage people to look at that. This was developed in the late 1990s. It's just a book. Everything in it, the print, the binder, the pages, the colors are all made with one material. So literally, if the book's been read and done with, it can go into a vat, and it can be remade into another book, a different book that people want to read. But so there are ways to do these kinds of things. Industry needs to be incentivized to do them because they're not doing them in the current phase. And we really need to, as consumers, we need to purchase items that fit that economy. In Europe, you're seeing a lot more of this blowback type of buyback type of process, and I encourage it on a more grand scale. But I don't look at our consumer power as being the driving force for a better future, right? I think that we have a lot of money and we should use it wisely, but I think we have to look beyond. We have to make decisions easy for people. Most people don't have the time or the inclination to spend looking for the so-called green product. There's also a lot of greenwashing associated with such products. So for the uninitiated, you can be misled, and you might be buying something worse than you were going to buy in the first place. I think we need to look back to our earlier conversations, because I see we're running out of time. But democracy, right? Getting people to participate in it and to speak to things we can use and use. Utilize in many different ways. For instance, food waste, yard waste, all of that carbon that often gets put in a landfill. If it's sought as a resource, it's compost, and compost is incredibly valuable for renourishing our yards, for gardens, for trees, for even our grass. If people want grass, the best nourishment is compost. For our house plants, in fact, many of us just get a pot and then we just leave it there, and then the plants don't do well after 5 years. Well, why not? Because it's kind of like if you just ate out of the same bowl and nothing new was put in it, you're gonna run out of nutrients very easily. So looking at that, we have a lot of waste. I think one of the largest, in terms of poundage, one of the largest waste products is our food waste and our yard waste. Well, there's no reason why that needs to be chucked away. That should be reintegrated into our local economy. Nobody should be buying pellets of wood that come from thousands of miles away. Nobody should be buying water like Fiji water. Where does that come from? The Fiji Islands. Does anybody know where that is? I mean, you literally could hardly find a place farther from us in the world than that, and yet we're drinking water. I mean, why don't we buy our beef from Antarctica, and buy our clothing from Siberia? I mean, let's just be international about it, right? No, I'm being a little funny here, but I'm trying to, there's things. I'll just give you one example. We've got 30 seconds left.
You're good.
A bottle of water. People are willing to spend $1, right? $2 even for a bottle of water.
Yeah.
Well, if you buy municipal water, that water is about 1,000 gallons for $1. Mm-hmm. So we are literally willing to pay 1,000 times more for a product, or even 2,000 times more. For what reason? Convenience. Now, if you went to buy a hamburger, typical hamburger, say, is $3, and somebody said, no, it's not $3 today, it's $6,000 for this burger. What would you say? You'd say, I'm never going to eat a burger that's $6,000, but you'll buy that bottle of water, and it's basically the same thing. And
same markup, yeah.
So we don't make that connection. We don't make that connection. And when we think about that bottle of water came in a plastic bottle, right, necessitating the whole issue of recycling. A lot of recycling doesn't actually take place, and that's a whole other.
Right.
You invite me back to discuss that issue.
That'll take up a whole hour. That is frustrating, that one.
But let's leave on a positive note. I mean,
Let's do it.
I think we really touched a lot of different pieces here.
Yeah.
We want democracy. We want people involved, engaged. We want people to realize that there are elected officials out there that do care and will listen. And then let's create more democracy through the idea that you had with regard to referenda and stuff. And if people could activate this is something we didn't mention, but if people could activate referenda, well, then they might be more participatory in the whole process because they would feel like they have a say in what happens in their community.
Absolutely. Dr. Peter Schwartzman, Mayor of Galesburg. Do you have any special events coming up? Anything you wanted to plug before we head out?
Wow. Well, that's a good one. Every day is a special event for me in a way. So I can't think of anything off the top of my head. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple things coming up in December. I mean, I think go to our Facebook page, your Facebook page, and that's a good place to find out when the next event. There are a lot of webinars over the holidays. A lot of one thing about COVID, we've learned to socialize a little bit over the internet, and we can meet people from all around the world without having to pay airfare or transportation costs. And so take advantage of that. I watched a webinar on ecosocialism this weekend. It was fascinating, the people who were involved with that. So
who did that? I want to watch this. Who did that?
There's a couple of different groups doing ecosocialism. I'm part of what's GEN, which is the Green Ecosocialist Network. But then there's another group, I think it's called Ecosocialist Action or something. And I honestly, I stumble there, but there's overlap between the groups, and they're trying to, again, have conversations about what kind of future do we want and how can we accelerate the transition to a happier place for all of us.
There it is. All right. Excellent last notes to go off on. That's it for tonight, folks. Thank you for watching the Illinois Green Party series. Dr. Peter Schwartzman, Mayor of Galesburg, thank you again for coming on so much for coming on again. And I think that's it. Be good and be green. Take care.